This is Moral of the Story, interesting people telling their favorite short stories and then breaking them down to understand what makes them so good. I'm your host, Max Czapowski. Today's guest is Sian Morson, the Antigua and Barbuda-born entrepreneur, artist, curator, investor, Web3 enthusiast, and builder of communities. And that's plural because Sian has had quite the pluralistic and diverse journey through life. Sian was born on the island of Antigua to a father from Curacao and a mother from Montserrat. So why Antigua? Well, because in a portentous preview of her intrepid adventures, as Sian's pregnant mother flew to Montserrat, Sian decided that the world was ready for her, and after getting off the plane, Sian's mother gave birth to the family's first Antiguan and Barbudan citizen. Sian spent her formative years on the island of St. Thomas and moved to New York at the ripe age of 11. Being an immigrant, she had the typical expectation of becoming a doctor or a lawyer. I hear that, girl. But when she cut her finger as a dishwasher and fainted at the sight of her blood, it became clear that medicine would not be in her future. Sian instead decided to embrace her creativity, going to Manhattan's High School of Art and Design, schlepping an hour each way from the Bronx, and continuing the rapid expansion of her horizons. Raised as an Adventist, Sian was not allowed to go to the movies growing up, so naturally, she chose to major in film and television at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and subsequently picked up a Master of Arts degree in design for interactive media at Middlesex University in London. Moving to the Bay Area during the dot-com boom, Sian started as a project manager in advertising, working for clients like Philips, Audi, Coca-Cola, and Reuters. One of the many companies Sian founded or co-founded was the Starfish Accelerator, a first-of-its-kind creative accelerator that invests in premium IP from mid-career storytellers of color, aiming to lift up content creators on the periphery of the mainstream industry. After spending time at Magic Leap as the head of operations and the director of immersive experience operations, Sian went all in on the world of Web3, running community at Palm NFT Studio and Cool Cats LLC, and starting the Blockchain, a community-driven magazine intended to provide creators of all races and creeds a platform to showcase their art. Sian now runs community at Science Magic Studios, a Web3 studio joint venture between comms agency Science Magic, crypto research firm Delphi Digital, and leading macro investor Raoul Pal. Sian has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Marie Claire, Essence, Inc. magazine, and Fast Company. You would think that it's a far cry from her Caribbean roots, except that Sian is doing what the West Indians are so good at: building, growing, and strengthening a deep sense of community with ties so close-knit that it really is one for all and all for one. Sian, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. You really did your research.
It's
It's
the least I
interesting
can do.
to hear it all told back to me. Usually I'm the one telling it, but it's good to hear it back.
Oh, no, you got to do the research. You got to have the solid introduction.
Absolutely.
So, Sian, you're here to tell us a story. Before we get into it, set the stage. Is there anything that we should know about the story before we begin?
I don't think so. I think it's interesting that you started out with my mom giving birth in Antigua because it's the story is actually about my mom. So I think it ties in really nicely. But I think it's something that everyone could relate to, or I'm hoping so anyway. And I've never told this story before, so it will be making its debut on your show.
I love debuts. All right, let's rock and roll. Tell me a story.
All right. So, a few years ago, my mom had a stroke. And what's important to know about me and my mom is we talk every day and sometimes multiple times per day. I live in Texas, but my mom does not live in Texas, and so she lives on her own. She's fairly active. She does all of the things, and so this one day we had spoken. She'd gone to the eye doctor, and she was telling me the results of what the doctor said. Everything was fine. Later that evening, I tried her again. I didn't get her, but I figured maybe she's just went to sleep. Later on that evening, I got a call from a cousin who lives about 5 or 10 minutes away. And the minute I got the call, I knew something was wrong. And I stayed on the line probably for about 2 or 3 hours. The fire and police personnel and neighbors were trying to get the door off to get into the home. My mom had she had been speaking to a friend of hers on the phone, and the friend realized that her speech was significantly slurred, and she wasn't really making much sense. And so we're thankful that that friend had the presence of mind to call my cousin, and then he was able to go down and with the fire folks and the paramedics, get the door open, get her into get her some help, get her to the hospital. I flew down, stayed with her in the ICU for about 3 days. My brother came down. We stayed with her for about 3 months. We're thankful that she had a full recovery from the stroke. So that was a few years ago. Now, fast forward to a few weeks ago. It might have been a month or two ago, actually. I don't remember. Anyway, was trying to reach my mom. What we did as a result of that, because that was so scary, was we put cameras throughout my mom's home just so we can keep an eye on, if anything happened of the sort again. Um, so I typically would give her a call, like I usually do. I didn't get her. So I remembered she said she was going to go to church. So I said, okay, maybe she's at church. I checked the cameras, but the entire system was down, and that was really
Oh.
scary to me because I'd never seen that. Typically, if one of the cameras goes down, we get notifications on our phones telling us, and usually it's like a
Hmm.
brief outage, goes back up. Entire system was down, so had no visibility on anything. So you know, a little concerned, but not terribly concerned. Called back in another couple of hours, did not get a response. Uh, Said, okay, maybe she stayed at church for lunch. That happens sometimes. So I'm really running through various scenarios, trying to calm myself down, um, but getting more and more nervous as time goes by. Reached out to my brother. Hey, have you heard from mom? No, no, didn't speak to her since yesterday. Don't know what's going on. Okay. Trying not to alarm him either. Couple
Yeah.
more hours. And so now it's been like all day and I'm starting to freak out. So I reach out to my cousin and I just say, hey, did you see mom at church today? Oh, yeah, she was at church and she went home. Okay, great. Have you spoken to her since she got home? No. Uh, so I'm trying not to alarm him, but I'm
Yeah.
like, look, somebody needs to go and check on mom. I don't have visibility into the home. I'm freaking out. So I call him back and I was like, hey, just, I haven't been able to reach her all day. I don't know what's going on. Please, please, please send somebody by. One of the kids can go by and just see if she's okay. Um, 10 minutes later, I get a call from my mom, right? She's like, oh, I forgot the phone in my purse. I came home from church. I forgot the phone in my purse, and it was buzzed. She turns it off. She turns the ringer off when she's in church, so she wasn't hearing it. And accidentally, I guess she unplugged the whole camera system, so that explains the whole thing. But those 6 hours were so harrowing for me, so scary, so terrifying. And when it turned out to be nothing, I really started to just examine, like, okay, um, why was I so afraid? And I just took a lot of time to stop and really reflect on what that meant, right? And so what I came up with was that obviously that was a fear-based thing. Fear is real, right?
Hmm.
It's a natural emotion. But what I realized as a result of that was that a lot of my decisions were fear-based, were coming from a very fearful place. And that was a change that I wanted to make in my life. And so as a result of that, I went back and just looked at other fear-based decisions that I'd made in my life, in my business, et cetera, and just did a full sweep. And so that's where I am today, is right now I'm really examining my life, going deep to make sure that decisions that I make are not sort of informed only by fear. So that's my story.
And you're in that process now of
I
the
am in that process
reexamination.
now. It is a process, not an event. It's not something that just happens, because you realize how deep rooted that fear is, and it's pervasive throughout your life. And so that is where I am today, is really trying to take a step back and understand the meaning behind some of the decisions that I have made and will continue to make throughout my life.
Well, first of all, thank God your mom's okay.
Yes.
That is crazy. Where does she live?
She lives in Florida.
In Florida by
Hmm.
herself.
Yes.
And how old is she?
She just turned 74 last week.
That it's like you installed the cameras specifically because of what happened.
Right.
And then
Yes.
she just unplugs the cameras by accident,
By
leaves the phone
accident.
in her purse with the ringer off by accident,
Like
and
all of
is
these things conspire. Yes.
it's like when Chernobyl exploded. They're like every one of these things. It wasn't any one thing that happened. It
Yeah.
was literally multiple things that all had to happen together in that sequence for this disaster to strike. And that's exactly what happened
Exactly.
with your mom. And the craziest
Yeah.
thing about it is she was completely oblivious the whole time.
Completely oblivious. Like when the kids showed up, she was like, what are you guys
Did you
doing
have some
here? What
choice
are you
words for her when you finally talked to her?
No, I was just relieved, really. And
Yeah.
we chuckled about it because to your point, it is, the perfect storm of these cascading events that led to this. So, um, learning experience as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
she was like, why were you worried? It's like, why was I worried? This has happened before.
You're like, yeah. I was going to say, you're probably, I could imagine the thought running through your mind of, okay, if there's a power outage, I have to install a generator and probably run some extra cables. And if I
Right.
do that, what are the other points of failure that could happen? And your mom's like, hey, good luck with that generator, girl. I just unplugged it. My bad.
No, she's like, it's not that deep. It's not that deep, you
Nothing wrong
know?
with the system. You
Right.
know, what I find interesting is there are these pivotal moments in our lives that we go through that when these pivotal moments occur, we have a an opportunity. And there is an active component to that opportunity and a passive component. And
Right.
the passive component is, hey, it has been presented to us, and we can either recognize it or not. The active component is that recognition, and then what do we do about it, right? What do we do with this information that we've been presented with? And so I feel like so I'm reading the Rick Rubin book that he wrote
Oh,
about creating art.
creativity. Yes, it's so good.
So good. I literally am just reading. The chapters are so short. When I started reading the book, I thought, this is crazy. I'm going to get through like 10 chapters in one sitting. And I only get through one because it's so deep. I have to go back and reread it,
Yeah.
you know? And so
Hmm.
one of the things he talks about is when you're creating art as an artist, you are just an antenna and a recipient of inspiration when that
Yes. I
inspiration
lost you
strikes.
there for a second. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. I was saying what he talks about is when you're creating art, one of the first steps is being open to receiving this information from the universe, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't end there. Once you receive the information, you have to take it in, interpret it, take it in, hold on to it, interpret it, and then do something about it. And that's what you did. You said, "Hey, I understand as a byproduct of this reflection, as a result of this reflection, that I have been making a lot of fear-based decisions." And so a lot of people I feel like wouldn't do that. What do you think made you sort of recognize that and interpret it as something that you needed to take action on?
Good question. I think it comes from a larger examination of my life that I've been going through. I've been just sort of stepping back and taking stock. I've been thinking a lot lately about legacy. What do I want people to feel, to think when I'm no longer here? What do I want my legacy to be? And I think that was part and parcel of it. I don't know if it actually came about because I have actually recently read the Rick Rubin book as well. And so that has certainly been food for thought. And so I've been doing a lot of self-examination. Um, and so what I came up with was that, I think, obviously I was afraid that something was wrong. Um, I was afraid that something had happened to my mom. I was afraid that she had passed. But, in the larger scheme of things, as I think about things like legacy, it's like none of us are getting out of here alive, right? This is an inevitability. And so what was more important for me to focus on, yes, certainly if something had happened to my mom, I would be sad. If my mom passes, I would be distraught, but it would be more beneficial for me to think about her legacy and what she's passed on to me and who I am because of her. And so why focus on the negative in an instance like that? Why run to fear as opposed to thinking about better things or more positive things, right? And so that sort of filtered out. It started with just that, but then I just really wanted to examine what other decisions have I been making that were fueled by fear. And when you really sort of peel back those layers, I was like, holy hell, there are a lot of decisions that I've made that have been based on fear. How could I revisit those situations and learn and not replicate? Because I think once you do it, you keep doing it. You know what I mean? Whether or not you realize it, just sort of becomes a habit. What are those opportunities that I may have had that I passed up on? And I've told myself it was another reason, but maybe deep down I was really afraid. And I found a lot of those things. So it was frightening, but it definitely presented that opportunity to dig a little deeper. And I don't know, yeah, I don't know if the book was a part of it. I've been reading not just that book, but other books that have been talking about sort of like on the consciousness scale, fear is really at the bottom. You know what I mean? It's like a negative thing to be driven by fear. And so what you want to do is you really want to raise your consciousness so that ultimately you're not making decisions that are rooted in fear. And so I'm glad that the realization came to me in the end. It certainly came by a tragic event, but I'm glad that it did, and I'm thankful.
Well, fortunately, not tragic in the end.
Yes, yes, that's true. That's true. Tragic in my mind, and that's the other thing is
Yeah.
how we psych ourselves out, by
Mhm.
just thinking of things that are not necessarily positive. So yes, I am certainly grateful.
The hardest thing about decisions that are driven by fear is exactly as you said, it's not obvious sometimes that they're driven by fear. And
Mm-hmm.
you really have to peel back the layers of the onion and go into this place that is not illuminated
Yeah.
most of the time. And, as I like to say, the good stuff happens in the deepest, darkest places. That's where the secrets are. That's where the revelations are. But
Yeah.
people just have a real discomfort around going to those places because the path of least resistance is to say, hey, this is how I've always done things. It's seemed to work fairly well for me to date.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why change now? Because for most people, good enough is good enough. But
Yeah.
they say that good is the enemy of the great, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes it just takes a massive personal crisis or trauma to sort of nudge you to reconsider your philosophy or your
Yeah.
drivers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned legacy, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, what do you want your legacy to be?
I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. And I think, I was listening to your introduction of me, and um, you're right. I have done so many things, and it's so varied. There are times when I'm like, well, maybe I should have focused on one thing so that I could be the very best at one thing. But I'm sort
Mhm.
of like, you know, I'm I've got my hands in all these different pots, and
Mhm.
I don't know if that makes legacy something easy to point to, or if it makes it a little more challenging. I'm inclined to think it makes it a little more challenging, but I haven't yet settled on what I want my legacy to be. I've been talking to a lot of my close friends about that. And they're like, you probably already have left your legacy and you don't even know it. But when I think of legacy, I think of meaning. I think of influencing other people and something that lives on way past me. And I don't even know that I've done that thing yet. I might have, but I'm still looking for it.
Well, there are a handful of people every generation, and sometimes even rarer than that, sometimes even more seldom, that leave what is an undisputable legacy. Elon Musk is a perfect example, right? How many industries has he changed? How many lives has he changed, right? But for most of us, I was thinking about this, you know, the vast majority of people are forgotten 3 generations after they're gone. If you look at the Day of the Dead as an example, right? Or Coco, like the concept behind that movie is you die your first death, you die your second death when you're forgotten, right? And so there's this focus on keeping people alive through their memories. And I think that's a wonderful concept. In reality, though, I just think back to my great grandmother, great grandfather. I know very little about them. And my grandfather, who was an incredible man, he was a poet and journalist. And when Chernobyl, as I mentioned, when it exploded, we were evacuated. I was living in Kiev at the time. They sent him to the reactor because he was a journalist, and he, you know, uh, witnessed the devastation firsthand. So he's lived an incredible life. He's published so many books, and but with every generation, that sort of fades a little bit. And what I think legacy is, at least in terms of sort of a lasting impact, is when you create something that outlives you. When you create art, whether it's books or paintings or music or whatever the case may be, but something that people can point to after you're gone and say, that was, to Rick Rubin's point, that was their perspective on the world, right? That was an embodiment of their values. But that's a legacy for people sort of outside of your immediate family, right? The legacy to me, as I think about, and I don't have it figured out, but I do think about this stuff quite a bit. The legacy to me, maybe it's not the number of people you impact. Maybe it's not the quantity of the impact. Maybe it's the quality of the impact.
Mm,
Maybe
yeah.
it's, I don't have to impact 1,000 people. I'm just not going to have that reach. But what if my 3 daughters remember me as an incredibly present father? And even if my legacy fades 2 or 3 generations down the road, they will remember me and they will be like, he was there to make dinner and play with us and whatever. And maybe that's what it is, right? But it's so hard, especially when you're younger, and even harder, I think, even hard when you start to age, to try to predict that, because there's so many variables. It's so unknown.
I think the way that I might choose to deal with it is to not think about it so much, just to continue doing what I'm doing. Because you're right. Um, I never understood the term you can't be it unless you see it. I never understood it until somebody said it to me. And then I was like, well, really? Like, I really influenced you in that way? It's like, yeah, I've never seen anybody like you. I've never seen a black woman start a mobile development firm and not be an engineer. Do you know what I mean? And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I guess that does make sense. And I'm thankful that, I've had a positive impact. And so maybe it is in those little moments. Maybe it is those one-on-one experiences where we don't even think of that really probably matter more than we think they do and actually contribute in a larger way towards our legacy, whatever that may be. Because yes, I've written books. Like you said, I make art. All that stuff will outlive me and will last longer than I will. But for me, I think it's those intimate moments where you get the chance to hear from someone how you've personally impacted them. That probably those mean more to me. Let's just put it that way.
Not quantity, but quality.
Exactly. Exactly.
By the way, to your earlier point of, is is the approach of doing all of these different things, kind of a portfolio lifestyle, a better approach than focusing on one thing, or maybe different, but better for you? I can tell you, as somebody who's done a lot of different things, that if I only stuck with one thing, I would have an acidic sense of regret that would eat away at me every single day I went back to do that one thing.
Yeah.
It would be toxic to me. It would be toxic.
Yeah.
And, there are people in this world like Kobe Bryant, for example. He knew what he wanted to do.
Right. He was focused.
And that was his box, right?
Yes.
That was, until the day he died, that was it. There were variations on how he approached it. He had, different other initiatives that he worked on, but it was all around basketball.
Yeah.
I am not that fortunate. I'm not fortunate enough to know exactly what I want to do, any one thing. But I feel like working on all these other things, if you have something even resembling a gift for those other things, then you owe it to yourself and the rest of the world, whoever might come across whatever you make. Even if it's one person that says, hey, as a Black woman who started a company, you're not an engineer, you've inspired me. And that makes that entire venture worth it.
I agree. And I used to look at people that way and be super envious, that they could focus on that one thing. But you're right. I think people like us are just built differently. I could never just focus on one thing.
Same.
Even as I sit in my office, I've got at least three things that I'm doing at any given time. I mean, this is a rare moment where I am focused in on one thing. I usually do have multiple things going at the same time, but that makes me feel alive. That makes me, happy. And that is how I operate at my best, is when I do have a few things going. And I'm also interested in so many things. It's like I don't know how to, the world is so full of wonderful things that I've not yet learned about. Why limit myself to just one thing, right?
You're speaking my language. I mean, it's our ADD is a gift to the world in some way.
I've started to embrace that, actually. Before I was like, oh, no, I'm not, I don't have. But now I'm like, well, maybe there is something to the fact that I might have a touch of ADD or something like that, because it's just how I am wired. So I'm embracing it, and I am extremely productive, let's just say, as a result of it.
I have a heavy touch of ADD, and the only way for me to be able to function as a productive human and member of society is to surround myself with projects that interest me. And again, going back to our North Star for the hour, which is Rick Rubin, he would say, you follow the seeds that have promise, the seeds that are interesting to you. So the order is the art, yourself, and then the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, Sian, let's go back to the story you told for a minute. What is the moral of that story?
That's a good question. I think the moral of the story is that fear can't be the motivator for anything, and live in the present. Actually, I think that might be the better moral, is to live in the present as opposed to the future or the past. Can't control either of those. All you have is today. Right. So I think that's the moral for me.
That's a great observation, because it's hard, as a human, that's what separates us from other species, is the ability to think about the past and the ability to envision a different future. And so here we are telling ourselves to be like the simpler creatures in the world by focusing on the present. But maybe my dog is onto something. Maybe the fact that when he's playing with me, nothing else exists in the world.
Nothing else, yeah.
Damn, that's a hell of a
You
feeling.
or I are not like that, though, right? Because we're doing something right now, but thinking about something else. So it is a constant challenge, but I think a worthy one too. you
Agreed.
know?
Agreed, because we're
Yeah.
always searching for something that excites us.
It's the search. It is the constant search. Yes, absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with the search. So, you have both heard and told some great stories in your day. So, what in your mind do really good stories have in common?
I think good stories have a personal bent to them. Telling a story from your own personal POV, I think, helps to pull the listener in. I think a good story has to have beginning, middle, and an end.
Hmm.
That might just be my film school education talking, but I have been programmed to believe that stories must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And a moral is always nice too. I think as much as you can
The
relate the
the hero's
story to
journey,
the
the
listener,
monomyth, right?
I think
It's got to be a
that makes sense.
predictable
I don't
structure.
think, yeah, I think that stories, if they're too heady, you lose your listener, right?
Hmm.
So I think the more that you can personalize your story so that your listener can relate on a very intimate level, those are good aspects of storytelling.
So then, on the other side of that, what makes for a good storyteller?
Ooh, clarity. I think that's the big one. People have to be able to understand what you're
Yeah.
saying. So I think it's important to speak slowly and clearly and choose your words with intention. Those all play into the story.
Yes.
100%. And the experience, right? Because
Uh-huh.
you are taking the user on a journey of sorts. They need to want to come with you on that journey.
Hmm.
So it is incumbent upon the storyteller to make sure that, you know, the user wants that. You don't lose them halfway through. You've got to keep them on the journey the entire way.
That's right. That's right. They have to be engaged.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does every story have to have a moral?
No, I don't think so. Because I don't know that the storyteller sets the moral. The moral is what I get from it as a listener. And it may just be a good laugh, right? That doesn't have to be
Hmm.
a moral. Or I could find deeper meaning, but I don't think every story has to have a moral. No.
Interesting. Perhaps the deeper meaning becomes the moral.
Maybe, but maybe not too, right? I mean, when
Yeah.
I meet up with friends, sometimes we're just shooting the shit and we're just telling stories. It's not, but it's a part of the overall experience and it brings us closer together, but there's no huge takeaway.
Of course.
But sometimes there is. I don't know. I don't know. But I would say no.
So you mentioned some books that you're reading. What are some of the sort of most impactful books that you've read?
We've already talked about the Rick Rubin book, but
Of course.
as a companion to that, there is a book called the Tao of Wu, written by the RZA, who is also a music producer. I'm sure you know from Wu Tang
Familiar.
Clan. And I bought that book last year at South by, and I never read it. And I have tons and tons of books in my um, Amazon shopping cart. And I told myself the last couple of months that I'm going to read all of the books that I have first before ordering new ones. And so that book
Mm.
was sitting around and I picked it up. And it's actually a really good read because he recounts his life, growing up in Brooklyn and Staten Island. And, he tells the whole story of how he came together with folks like Method Man and the entire group and ODB and all of that. But then there are sort of morals that are rooted in Taoism and Buddhism and Eastern religions riddled throughout the book, and it is so amazing. It was not what I was expecting. I was pleasantly surprised, and I think that's a fantastic. It's a great book. I don't know
Interesting.
how. Yeah, I don't know how many people are even familiar with it because I did not even know that RZA wrote a book, but it is a really 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 good book. It's an easy read too. Maybe it's really thin, so it's easy to get through in maybe a day or two, depending on how much you get through it. But highly recommend that.
Well, I can tell you, just because it's a thin book doesn't make it an easy one to read. Because I just read
It's true.
Michael Eric Dyson's book about Jay-Z's lyrics, and it was a tiny little thing, but it took
Hmm.
me weeks to get through it because it is dense.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow. I'll
it's a
have to add
good
that to
book.
my list.
Oh, definitely. Uh, the funny thing about Wu Tang, "Incarcerated Scarfaces" by Raekwon was one of the
Mm.
first rap songs that I ever heard. Back, this is like early '90s, right after
Really?
we moved to America. Yeah, do you remember that song? It's such a good track.
I don't actually.
Oh, that
I
drum
don't, but
beat is
actually,
so good.
fun fact is that I grew up on Staten Island. So when I
Oh,
came from the Virgin Islands, we landed on Staten Island, and that, you want to talk about a culture shock? It was
oh my
like,
God.
whoa! It was like, just first of all being in New York City, but working class Italian, Irish,
Yeah.
blacks, everybody sort of. Oh, it was wild. It was really interesting. So I had a affinity for the Wu Tang when they came out because I was like, you never hear anything about Staten Island. It's like nobody. Yes, it's like a whole different world, to be honest. Growing up there, so I was really
Right.
really pleased when they came out. Yeah,
And they repped it big, right? Because like Nas was repping Queens, you had Biggie and Jay-Z
yeah,
rapping Brooklyn. And so who was,
exactly.
and then I think Big Joe was the Bronx, I think.
Hmm.
And so like who was doing Staten Island? So there had to be somebody.
Here comes the Wu. Yeah,
Oh
exactly,
my gosh.
exactly.
So, okay. So last question for you. If you could say one thing to your 20-year-old self, what would it be?
It would be, oh, the places you will go. Like, I think
Ooh.
I've always been sort of a bit of a loner, even through high school. And, I wanted to go to film school. I went to film school. Even in film school, I was a bit of a loner, which is odd because film is a collaborative art. So you
Hmm.
literally could not make your film alone. You needed people
Yeah.
around you. But I was very shy, very sort of, closed off. And I remember I got my first apartment. It was on Avenue B between 6th and 7th in Manhattan. I'd, walk to school, go to work, walk home. And I was in my head a lot, just thinking about, my God, what is my life going to be like? Am I going to stay in New York? Am I going to leave? What am I going to do? Am I going to end up in the film industry? And so I could have never imagined everything that I've done when I was that young person in New York, just sort of starting out my life and trying to chart a course for myself. I could never have imagined that I would have lived in London, traveled all over the world, spoken all over the world in front of hundreds and thousands of people, written two books, just everything. Um, no clue. You have no clue. You think, oh my God, everything is so small, but it's really, really not. And so I think, yeah, oh, the places you'll go is the one thing I would say to that young girl. She had no clue. She had no idea where she would end up, but I'm
Some
I'm pleased.
timeless Dr. Seuss wisdom.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah.
You know who else was in his head a lot as he was taking public transportation in New York is Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Ah, yes, yeah, yeah.
A lot.
Funny fun fact is the Miranda Foundation is actually an investor in Starfish.
No way.
So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a wonderful full circle moment there.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah.
I reached out to his team to get him on the show because I'm ambitious like that. And I literally I wrote this massive rap, massive. It was like 2 pages long. And
Really?
yeah, and they just responded and they said, that was a very creative note, but Lin Manuel is too busy with his production schedule. I was like, damn.
Oh
So
man.
good though.
Wow. I'd love to read that.
I'll send it to you, no problem. Yeah, I'll send it
Yeah,
to you when we get
yeah.
off.
I mean, I remember where I was when I first heard the soundtrack to Hamilton, and I was just like, my mind was completely blown, just completely
Incredible.
blown. Just how do you take a story like that and turn it into like hip hop? But then when you really listen to it, this guy was a student of hip hop, like
All along.
without a doubt. The way that he crafted those, the storytelling was just brilliant, completely
I mean,
brilliant.
the fact that you can divide Disney movies into the before Lin-Manuel era and the
Mm-hmm.
after Lin-Manuel era, because
Mm-hmm.
everything from like the Maui's rap in Moana to
Mm-hmm.
all of the actual songs and chord progressions in what's the, oh my gosh, not Coco, Mirabelle, what's the Encanto, right? He,
Oh, uh-huh. I
like
didn't see
all
that
of
one.
that. I remember there was one time he was on stage presenting at one of the award shows, and
Mm-hmm.
he was introducing something about Moana, and he said this line that was something like, with her eyes on the horizon line. And I was just like, that is, that's just incredible. Like he
Yeah.
repeats the same two or three syllables across multiple words and it all makes sense. It was just,
Yeah.
don't get me started on it.
No, yeah, yeah. Well, we'll have to have a whole separate conversation about Lin-Manuel and his brilliance.
That'll have to happen. Yeah. He's another
Yeah.
guy who's going to leave a legacy that will long, long outlive him.
Oh
Long
my
outlive him.
word. Yeah,
Can you
yeah.
imagine?
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Well, that does it.
Really?
Sean,
Wow.
I know. It flew by, didn't it?
It did fly by. Yeah.
Well, I think it's rare because a conversation where you are actually in the moment and you're actually engaged and the other person is actually engaged is that kind of rare conversation and makes the
Absolutely.
time fly by.
Yeah. Yeah. It really does. And I just want to say thank you. It's such a brilliant idea for a podcast. I listen to tons
Thank
and
you.
tons of podcasts, and I'm actually recording my own now. But this is such a
Yes.
brilliant idea. It's really, really clever and so smart. I love
Thank
it.
you.
Love it. Yeah.
I appreciate it, Sean. Well, it was absolutely an honor to have you on the show. Sian Morson, entrepreneur, investor, thought leader, community builder, polymath of the highest caliber. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Max.
For show notes and more, head over to mosspod.org. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast on. This was Moral of the Story. I'm Max Trapowski. Thank you for listening. Talk to you next time.